Sources close to the couple say William and Catherine didn't simply leave Windsor, they escaped something. And what they found waiting on the other side of that decision has quietly unsettled every calculation the royal family thought it had already made. The public got the comfortable version. A young family, a modest cottage, a fresh start. But that's only half the story, because what nobody is talking about is what living inside those walls actually revealed. And the question that nobody inside the palace wants answered out loud is this: what exactly did Windsor confirm? The decision made sense completely when they made it. September 2022, William and Catherine chose Adelaide Cottage, 4 bedrooms, no live-in staff, a working family house sitting quietly on the Windsor estate. Sources close to the couple described it as deliberate, not a compromise, a statement. The Princess of Wales personally oversaw how ordinary it would feel inside those walls. No grand apartments, no sprawling palace corridors, just enough space for 3 children to grow up with something resembling a normal childhood. And for a while, sources suggest it worked. But here is what that quiet domesticity was actually protecting against, the part the public narrative consistently missed. William and Catherine were not simply choosing a house. They were constructing an argument that a senior royal family could live close enough to ordinary life that ordinary life would protect them back. Proximity to normal as a kind of armor. That argument held through 2022. Then Queen Elizabeth died. Then came the cancer diagnoses. Then came something else entirely. Something underneath the house itself that nobody had been looking for, because nobody thought they needed to. What triggered someone looking in the first place? The answer begins with a survey that was never supposed to find anything at all. The survey was commissioned in early 2024. Nothing dramatic about that. Aging estate properties require periodic structural assessments, and Adelaide Cottage, sitting on grounds dating back centuries, was overdue. On paper, this was maintenance administration, unremarkable, routine. The engineers arrived on a Tuesday morning, 2-man team, standard equipment. Their mandate was foundations and drainage, the kind of work that generates a clipboard report nobody reads twice. For 17 minutes, that is exactly what it was. And then it wasn't. When a structural survey stops being routine, it stops for a reason. Engineers don't pause for nothing. They pause because something in front of them doesn't match what every previous record said should be there. What they found in those foundations matched nothing. Not the 1832 estate drawings, not the post-war drainage maps, not the security infrastructure surveys quietly conducted when William and Catherine first moved in. The discrepancy was geological, something running beneath the cottage that the ground itself had apparently been concealing for a very long time. The engineers flagged it immediately. Within the hour, sources suggest the report had moved up the chain in a way that routine maintenance reports simply do not. Which raises the obvious question: what exactly had they found down there? Now, what they found wasn't just structural. That matters. A tunnel network. Pre-Victorian. Sources suggest the passages running beneath Adelaide Cottage trace back to the English Civil War era, mid-17th century, carved out when Windsor's grounds served purposes that had nothing to do with royal domesticity. Access corridors, concealment routes, contingency infrastructure built into the land itself before the cottage above it had even been conceived. And here is what stops you cold. These tunnels appear on no official survey. Not the 1832 estate drawings, not post-war drainage records, not the security infrastructure assessments quietly commissioned when William and Catherine moved in. Completely absent, deliberately absent, or simply missed. Sources cannot confirm which, and that distinction is not a small one. What the engineers were looking at in those foundations was a documented gap in every layer of institutional knowledge surrounding one of the most security-conscious properties in Britain. The question that immediately follows is obvious. How? How does a tunnel network survive decades of royal security sweeps, professional surveys, and post-911 infrastructure hardening without appearing once? Sources suggest 2 possibilities exist. Either the tunnels were genuinely unknown, which raises catastrophic questions about the competence of every security review conducted across the last 30 years, or they were known, quietly, by someone, and quietly kept off the record. Neither answer is reassuring. Both answers are serious. What we do know is that once the engineers flagged the network, the report didn't travel through standard maintenance channels. It moved faster than that, higher than that, and the tunnels themselves, sources suggest, showed something the structural age alone couldn't explain. Because a Civil War era passage is one thing, evidence that someone had been inside it recently is something else entirely. Now the report has moved, not through the usual channels, not at the usual pace. Something underneath Adelaide Cottage had been used recently, and that changes everything. It is approximately quarter to midnight when the infrared perimeter sensors along the cottage's eastern boundary register movement, not outside the property. Below it, sources say the alert reaches Marcus Headley, the Wales family's head of protection, within 40 seconds. Headley, by all accounts a methodical and undemonstrative man, doesn't immediately escalate. He checks the sensor log against the structural team's earlier flagging. He checks it twice, then he moves. William wakes first. Sources suggest this is almost never a coincidence with him. Military conditioning from his search and rescue years means his nervous system responds to atmospheric changes before his conscious mind catches up. He was sitting upright, sources say, before he'd fully processed why. Catherine wakes seconds behind him, not because of noise, because William had gone completely still. That stillness, sources suggest, is its own alarm. And then the knock comes. Soft, 3 precise taps at the bedroom door. Not the knock of someone delivering bad news impulsively, the knock of someone who has already decided what comes next and is simply waiting for the door to open. Headley is standing in the hallway when William opens it. No briefing document, no phone in his hand. Just a man choosing his words with the kind of deliberate economy that sources describe as the signature of someone managing their own reaction in real time. 3 people standing in a corridor at midnight, the children sleeping feet away, and whatever Headley knows, he hasn't said it yet. What were those 5 words? Because once they were spoken, nothing about that house felt the same. Now Headley speaks. 5 words. Sources say they were these: someone has been living there. Not was. Not may have been. Present tense implication wrapped inside past tense phrasing, and William, who had spent years training his instincts to separate manageable threats from genuine ones, understood immediately what those words actually meant. Because the evidence Headley then described wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't the kind of thing you explain away as residual debris from a decades-old tunnel network or maintenance equipment left behind by a surveying crew. What the security team found in those foundations, sources suggest, was a picture of deliberate, sustained human occupation. Tools laid out with the kind of care that implied regular use. No surface rust, no grime accumulation, nothing consistent with equipment abandoned months or years prior. Fresh footprints in the dust, more than one set, moving in patterns that suggested familiarity with the space, rather than someone navigating it for the first time. And then, the details that genuinely changed the register of this entire situation. Dated water bottles, a folding chair positioned facing upward toward the floor joists above, a thermal blanket still folded, the kind designed for sustained warmth in an enclosed space. Someone hadn't stumbled into those tunnels. Someone had quietly, deliberately made them habitable, had returned repeatedly, had, sources suggest, been doing so for long enough that the space had begun to accumulate the small domestic logic of regular occupation. But here is the specific detail that sources describe as the moment the room completely changes. That folding chair, positioned facing upward, toward the floorboards, toward the rooms above. The children's bedrooms were directly above that section of the foundations. William and Catherine are standing in that hallway processing not just a security breach, but the particular shape of it, the duration, the proximity, the angle of that chair. Headley's team couldn't yet say who, couldn't yet say exactly how long. Those answers were still being pieced together in the hours after the discovery. What they could say, and what sources suggest Headley communicated with quiet precision, was that whoever had been down there had not been watching the tunnels. They had been watching the house. And that question, what exactly had they seen, wouldn't be answered until the photographs were found. And then they found the photographs. Sources suggest this is the detail that changed the tenor of everything happening inside that hallway. Not the tunnels, not the chair. The photographs, recovered from a waterproof case tucked behind the folding chair's rear leg, processed within the hour by Headley's team, and brought back upstairs in a folder that sources describe as being handled with the particular deliberateness of people who already know what's inside it. Now, the images themselves told a story that no intruder could have assembled accidentally. Sources suggest the angles were the giveaway, not the kind of photographs you take when you're disoriented underground, holding a phone up toward a gap in the floorboards and hoping for something. These were positioned, composed, taken from consistent vantage points, at consistent times, in a sequence that sources say mapped almost exactly to the Wales family's daily domestic rhythm. Morning light in one window, a particular hallway lamp switching on at a time William and Catherine would recognize immediately, the pattern of which rooms were lit and when. And then there were the ones taken directly beneath the children's rooms. The timestamps, sources suggest, showed those images clustered in the late evening hours, after bedtime. The intruder, whoever whoever they were, had been directly below George, Charlotte, and Louis while they slept, methodically documenting the layout and routine of the floor above. That is not surveillance of a building, that is surveillance of a family. But here's the detail that sources say hit hardest. The photographs spanned multiple dates, not one visit, not a single night's reconnaissance. The collection represented what investigators quietly described as a sustained, deliberate operation, someone who had returned repeatedly across a period that security teams were still trying to bracket precisely, which meant every night William and Catherine had felt safe in Adelaide Cottage, had genuinely believed the Windsor move was working, had told themselves ordinary life was possible. Someone below them was actively, methodically watching that belief prove itself. The question that immediately followed was not academic, it was immediate. If this had been happening for weeks, possibly longer, how do you move 3 sleeping children out of that house right now without them understanding what has just been discovered beneath their beds? Now, here is the part that sources suggest nobody fully accounts for when they describe what happened next. The decision to leave was not a debate. William made it in under 90 seconds, sources say, the moment Headley finished his assessment. No family meeting, no weighing of options, no waiting until morning. 3 children were asleep upstairs, and someone had been living beneath them. The calculation was immediate, but the logistics of that decision are where the cost lives. Moving 3 children out of a house at midnight under emergency protection protocols means waking them without explanation. It means keeping your voice steady when everything in you is not steady. Sources suggest Catherine handled this almost entirely herself, moving between bedrooms, quiet reassurances, the practiced calm of someone who had rehearsed ordinary disruption 1,000 times for school runs and public engagements, now deployed for something entirely different. George, Charlotte, Louis, each one lifted or guided through a house that suddenly needed to feel unremarkable because the alternative was frightening, a 7-year-old with a truth no child should carry. And that, sources say, is what it actually cost them, not the security breach itself, not the photographs. What it cost was the thing the Windsor move was always built around, the genuine, deliberate belief that they could give their children an ordinary life. That Adelaide Cottage, small and unpretentious and intentionally normal, was proof that proximity to ordinary was possible. Walking those children out at midnight dismantled that belief in a single hour. The house they left behind was now a crime scene. What they didn't yet have were answers. Not who had been there, not for how long, and not how every layer of protection around them had quietly, completely failed to notice. The house behind them was a crime scene. The answers weren't there yet, and here is where the investigation runs directly into a wall, because the questions that matter most are precisely the ones nobody can close. Who was down there? Sources say investigators were still unable to confirm that within the first 72 hours of the breach being formally logged, no fingerprints matched any known database entry. No surveillance footage from the estate's external perimeter captured an arrival or departure consistent with the evidence found below the house. The thermal blanket, the water bottles, the folding chair, all of it suggested extended occupation. None of it pointed to a name. That absence is itself significant because Adelaide Cottage sits inside one of the most surveilled royal estates in the country. Motion sensors, infrared perimeter coverage, physical patrols on rotating schedules. And yet, sources suggest not one of those layers, not technical, not physical, not administrative, generated a single alert about what was happening directly beneath the Wales family's floorboards. That is not a gap. That is a complete failure across every independent system simultaneously. And the question investigators genuinely cannot yet answer is this: how long? The rust-free tools suggested recent use. The water bottle dates suggested presence within a calculable window. But the tunnel network itself predated every modern security audit, which means the access point, whenever it was first used, predates the security architecture built to catch exactly this kind of intrusion. Someone could have been moving through those passages not for weeks, but for considerably longer, completely invisible to systems that were never designed to look underground. Sources close to the investigation suggest that possibility was not ruled out. It was quietly, deliberately kept open. So you have 3 unanswerable questions stacked on top of each other. Who, how long, and how the entire apparatus around one of Britain's most protected families failed without a single warning. None of those questions have clean answers, and the people asking them most urgently are William and Catherine, who are now trying to rebuild something stable for 3 children in the middle of 2 cancer recoveries and a year William himself described as the hardest of his life. The discovery didn't just expose a breach, it landed at the worst possible moment. And here is what that breach actually breaks. Not just a security protocol, not just a property record, something far harder to rebuild. When William and Catherine chose Adelaide Cottage in 2022, they were making an argument. Sources suggest it was a deliberate philosophical statement about what modern royal life could look like. Modest square footage, no live-in staff, children cycling to school. The message was clear. Proximity to normal life was possible. They believed it. They built their family inside that belief. The discovery underneath that house is the counter-argument, and it is devastating. Because what sources suggest the investigation quietly confirmed is that the very features that made Adelaide Cottage feel livable, the informal grounds, the reduced security footprint, the conscious rejection of fortress-style royal living, were precisely what made it penetrable. The openness wasn't incidental to the breach, it was the condition of it, and this lands at a moment when neither William nor Catherine has any margin left. Kate's cancer is in remission, but chemotherapy only ended in September 2024. Charles's diagnosis is still actively shaping every calculation the family makes. William described the previous 12 months as the hardest of his life. Sources close to the family suggest the stability of that modest Windsor house was carrying enormous emotional weight through both recoveries. That home is now gone, not structurally, philosophically. The family has since moved to Forest Lodge, bigger, more defended, more controlled. William reportedly described Adelaide Cottage as cursed. You can understand why. But here is what that framing doesn't resolve. A curse is external, random, impersonal. What the investigation is now asking is whether this was something else entirely. Something that came not from outside the estate at all, but from somewhere much closer in. And here is where the investigation stops having answers. Everything built across these 9 chapters, the tunnels, the photographs, the midnight evacuation, the collapsed illusion of ordinary life, all of it points forward to a single question that sources say remains, as of now, genuinely open, not procedurally open, substantively open, the kind of open that changes the shape of everything already established. The question is not whether someone was there, that is settled. The question is how they got in, and specifically, whether the access point into that tunnel network originated from inside the Windsor estate itself. Sources suggest investigators have not been able to rule that out, and that is not a minor caveat. That is the thread that makes this something other than an external breach. If the entry point came from inside, from someone with estate access, with knowledge of a tunnel network that appeared on no official record, then this was not a failure of detection, it was something deliberately enabled. Now, nothing individually proves that, but sources close to the investigation describe a collective picture that keeps pointing inward rather than outward, and that pointing has not resolved. The who remains unknown. The duration of occupation remains unconfirmed at its outer edges, and the mechanism of entry, the one piece that would answer both, has not been closed. William and Catherine moved to Windsor for proximity to normal. What they discovered underneath that house was not a random intrusion. Sources suggest it may have been something quiet and close and patient. The family is at Forest Lodge now. The files, presumably, are still open. And somewhere inside this estate, so is the door. The Wales family fled Adelaide Cottage's shadow, and William paid the price. Kate survived. The curse lifted, but Harry's exile and Charles's fragility remain unsealed. This wasn't escape, it was survival. Who's next to break? The Retreat.ste